Thank you for joining us. We are going to give it a minute while people roll in, but as we wait, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from and what organization you're connected to. So we're just going to give it a few seconds, but again, drop your information in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. Okay. Okay, I think we have a lot of people, and so far, thank you for participating in the chat. So welcome. My name is Jordan Tobias, and I'm the manager of grants and programs at the Foundation for Financial Planning. We're also joined by Rachel Roth, who is the senior director of grants and programs, and she will speak towards the end of the webinar. We are so pleased to be here today for part 2 of our series on pro bono financial planning for military personnel, veterans, and families. In this presentation, Dr. Brandy Baxter will build upon part 1 of the series, which was led by Dick Power. Like all of our webinars, this series is eligible for a CFP and AFC CE credit. If you're a CFP, we will submit your credit to the CFP board. All of our AFCs in the audience will need to submit a code to the AFCPE themselves, and Rachel will let you know the code at the end of the webinar. We'll also email it out. Before I introduce our speaker, I would love to spend a few minutes talking about FFP and the work that we do. So a question that we get all the time, why pro bono financial planning? And the answer is simple. We know that millions of Americans need but can't access quality, ethical financial advice, and that's not okay with us. More than half of Americans do not have a savings to cover an unexpected expense of $1,000. And there are groups that are especially at risk. People facing a serious illness, victim of natural disasters, women and men who experience domestic violence, and members of our military community. So for the last 28 years, our goal has been to help communities in need by creating better access to quality financial advice and guidance. So how do we do this? We do this in 3 major ways with your support. First, we develop and support pro bono financial planning programs in partnerships with nonprofits all across this country. We also recruit and train financial advisors like you all to do pro bono services, and we connect them directly to volunteer opportunities through our volunteer platform, probonoplannermatch.org. We also lead the movement to foster pro bono services within the profession via original research, industry partnership, and public awareness activities. We also offer a number of resources to support our advisors. So first, we offer the Pro Bono Financial Planning Volunteer Training. It's a free 1-hour course that helps advisors understand the basics of how to provide pro bono services to underserved communities. It's also eligible for CE credit. Then we have probonoplannermatch.org. It's the first of its kind where we connect CFPs with nonprofits that would that provide pro bono financial planning. Lastly, we provide E&O liability insurance to advisors who connect to opportunity through our platform, probonoplannermatch.org, or any organization that we grant to. So before we get into our webinar today, I just want to tell you briefly about our new pilot program. We're collaborating with an online platform called the Coordinated Assistance Network to offer pro bono financial guidance and advice to veterans and members of the military. We're now looking for a group of superstar advisors who will use the platform to conduct virtual one-on-one sessions with clients. So to learn more about the program, the training we provide, and how to get connected to military families, please visit the link that Rachel will drop in the chat. If CAN isn't an option for you right now, we encourage you to get involved however you can, whether that be registering on Pro Bono Planner Match, signing up for our newsletter, or donating. We can't do this work without you. So if you would like to do those three, please contact my colleagues listed on the screen. So last but not least, we are thrilled today to have two fantastic speakers with us. First, Dick Powers, who's a CFP and retired Army Colonel. He will do a quick recap of part one of our series. And then we have Dr. Brandy Baxter, who's an accredited financial counselor. She's the owner of Living Abundantly, where she coaches couples with their money goals. She's also the co-founder at Ease Texas, a nonprofit that provides peer groups for women in the military community. She is also a veteran of the United States Air Force, a spouse of an Air Force veteran, and she strives to be a servant leader in the community. She does it all. And now, with that ado, we will pass it off to Brandy.
Thank you, Jordan. I do not do it all. I just try to spread it all out to get a lot of things accomplished. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you all for being in attendance. And we're going to just jump right in because Dick and I are excited to just have this conversation with you all and provide resources as well as information and experiences to help you in the work that you're doing. I saw some of you posting that you're already working with the CAN project. And so this webinar will hopefully give you just a different perspective to think about how you're working with your clients. So without further ado, let me jump into kind of our game plan for today and what we want to chat about. We're going to do a quick recap from Dick's first presentation, really just reminding us all about who our military community is, as well as some of the unique details that make serving with military families different than serving with families who don't have military experience. We're also going to talk about those unique experiences. I'm going to speak specifically from the aspect of the veteran life and family member because one, that's the experience that I know personally, but also a lot of the veterans, a lot of the members of the military community that you will serve via the CAN project, they are going to be veterans. And so we just want to really kind of share some unique experiences and stories with you all about working with that population. Then we're going to really show why your work matters. I know sometimes working in pro bono work can feel like, what am I doing? And is it really worth it? But I want to just take a moment and emphasize why your work matters. And then I'm going to share some resources with you that can help prepare you for the next meeting that you have with a veteran client. Our goal is to arm you, if you will, with the resources to equip you and prepare you for serving in the military community. So without further ado, let me just toss it back to my colleague, Dick Power, and he's going to share with us what is it that makes the military community so special.
Thanks, Brandy. If you were with us about a month ago, then you've been through a lot of the information about the military community and the benefits that are provided for them. If you did not join, I would encourage you to go to the Foundation's website. It was recorded and it's filled with a great deal of information. And you can also download the slide deck because there's a lot of useful links there as well. So I want to talk about first, primarily, what the force is that we're talking about serving. And in the current military, there's sort of three categories of people. There's the regular active duty force. These are the folks that are 24/7, 365 in the uniform, serving all over the world, providing a major part of our national security infrastructure. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, you name it. They're there, and there's a good bunch of them, but they're not the only part of that military force structure. Indeed, the Army, the National Guards, Army Guard and Air Guard in the states, and the reserves of all of the military services provide a major supplemental force should there be a national emergency. And you recall that many of them have been activated over the last 20 years, particularly in our global war on terror. And the Guard and the Reserve also have to have some folks that are there every day to make sure that facilities are maintained and records are kept and everything is prepared for the traditional Guard and Reserve people who only put that uniform on about 2 days every month. They come in for a weekend and they sort of refresh their training that they've already been trained up to do while they were serving in the training mode. They come in for a month, for a couple of days each month, and then a couple of weeks a year where they get to train in a larger unit formation. But they're dispersed all around the country in various small armories and training centers. And they have to have some active folks to keep that ready. And just a minor point here, the folks in the active duty force are active duty, and the folks in the reserves and National Guard, when they are mobilized, are on active duty, and then they return to their reserve component status. Next chart, please, Brandy. So this gives you an idea of what the breakdown is between the two. We've got about 2.25 million people that are part of the armed forces in the United States today. About 55% are on active duty, 45% are in the reserve components that I mentioned. You can see the active duty force is fairly young, and that's important to note because we know that young folks tend to be a little weak in financial literacy, and those military members fall into that category. This just gives you a summary of what their structure is. We're approaching 20% of the force being women, which is interesting. There's a good minority component, which is part of our rich culture. And there's other factors to be examined, but essentially the forces are very comparable with those minor exceptions. The reason the active duty force is younger is because a typical active duty member joins up right out of high school, serves 4 years, and then gets out. Whereas the reserve component folks, because they're living and working in their hometown and have a regular life, all but 2 days a month and 2 weeks in the summer, they tend to stay in a little bit longer because it's easier to deal with. Next chart, please. Now, the bigger community, or the military community, is only about 2.25 million. The bigger community is the veteran community. Almost all those folks that are in that military community, when they leave, they're veterans. Well, they're veterans while they're there as well, but they sort of segue into purely a veteran status once they leave the military. You can see the number is much bigger, over 18 million people. You can also see that the component of the veteran community, we used to think of, and let me be a sexist here, and we used to think of veterans as old guys, and that's no longer the case. You can see a much higher percent of veterans are coming from the Gulf War era, the global war on terror era, and other peacetime elements. So us old guys from Vietnam, and I'm a Vietnam veteran, are fading fast, and the earlier elements are of minor consequence now in terms of numbers. I think it's important to note that about 10% of that total, a little bit more than 10%, is disabled, some severely disabled, some loss of limbs and so forth. So there's an interesting context to think about there. The veterans really the folks that need most of our services because particularly in active duty military, on every major installation, there are people there as financial advisors. They have people that are DoD employees. They have people that they contract for to provide services to military members. Those folks are hired and deployed all around the world. They may not have the best coverage possible, but from personal experience, I can tell you the Department of Defense isn't likely to invite you as a volunteer to go on post and help a service member. They would like to do it themselves. They're chartered to do it themselves, and they are expected to do it themselves. National Guard, in particular, because it's a state organization, might invite you to come in and help, and so that's the place you could serve. But the big numbers are really in the veteran community, and that's primarily what we're going to focus on today. because I think it's the place where the need is greatest. Brandy, back to you.
So thanks, Dick. I appreciate you sharing that overview, especially for those who may not have watched the first session. While Dick was talking, a couple of things came to mind that I want to make sure we emphasize. Those that serve in the military, they are part of a tight-knit community, and that will often influence the way that they approach life after the military, looking for that same tight-knit community. Before we get into just sharing some of the unique experiences about our military veterans, I want to offer a short disclaimer and to say that we are not going to discuss actual cases of clients that we have worked with. We are not going to share specific details about any one person. I'm sure many of you in the financial services sector, you already know these disclaimers. But what we are going to do is I'm going to share some of my personal experiences, and then we're going to just sort of fictionalize experiences that we have had with other veterans. And I want to make sure we're all on the same page with that. But I also want to make sure that while the next few slides are going to discuss potential challenges that you may face when working with your veteran client, I want us to be careful that we don't think that this is the picture of every veteran. Many of our military service members leave active duty and become members of our society and our community, and they don't have any of the challenges that we're going to discuss. But Dick and I thought it was important to zero in on a couple of these scenarios because many of you are working with clients and you're probably experiencing what I would call a speed bump. You're probably experiencing the client is not as responsive as you would like them to be, or maybe they're just not replying to you or interacting with you in a way that's traditional or that feels comfortable for you. We believe that the focus of our sharing this content with you is to help you kind of peek behind the curtain of what could be going on in the mind and the life of a military veteran. We want to kind of give you a behind the scenes look at what some of the things are that could be influencing and that could be causing these challenges that your clients are experiencing. So with that frame of mind, as we go forward, I want you to remember not all veterans have these challenges, but also this is our way of resourcing and equipping you as you're serving the veteran community. So one of the first things I want to chat about is many military veterans are eligible for veteran affair benefits. And we often assume that every single veteran is going to have access to these benefits. But honestly, not all veterans are eligible. Just because you served in the military does not make you eligible for veteran benefits through the VA. So the member would have to apply for these benefits. More importantly, there has been a season of life in our community where the veterans did not trust the VA hospital. And as a result, you may think, oh, you have access to veteran care, veteran resources, but the veteran, him or herself, may be resistant to take advantage of those resources because of either stories that they've heard in the past or even their own experiences with the veteran affair. So I want you to keep that in mind, that while it may appear that you can just recommend that your veteran go to the VA to get resources, that veteran might be resistant. The other thing is, especially when you're looking at how to minimize medical expenses, you may think, oh, you can just go to the VA and get access to care. But not all medical care is covered for veterans through the VA. In fact, only service-connected disabilities are covered by the VA, which means that your service member may incur medical costs that are unrelated to their service-connected disability, and that would obviously affect their financial plan. So you would want to make sure that as you're thinking through benefits and services that are available for your veteran, that you understand that not all care is covered and that not all veterans are eligible for benefits through the VA. The other thing that I think is important to mention is that when the veteran is coming into civilian community, this may be information that they themselves may not be clear on. And so as you're having conversations with your veteran client, it's important for you to understand to ask very intentional questions to help clarify in their mind and in yours what services are available to them and what services may not be available to them. As we think about veteran care, it is very easy to forget the role of the caregiver. And like Dick mentioned in his recap, a lot of veterans, about 10% or maybe even more, are service connected disabled. And so what that means is, as you see in the little graphic there, sometimes our veterans have mobility challenges. Sometimes our veterans may not be able to care for themselves. And that means that a caregiver would have to be involved. And so as you're working with your clients and you are meeting with a family, you will probably note that the caregiver is equally involved in the financial conversation for that service member. But the tricky thing about this and why it's important for you to have this insight is because that caregiver may not be able to work if their veteran spouse or veteran family member requires around the clock care, which, as you all know, in this day and age, dual income families have become the norm. And so if you're accustomed to having a dual income family and now you have to be the caregiver for your service member, that can affect your finances. Additionally, the veteran may know what benefits they are eligible for, but the caregiver may not know. And so as you're having financial conversations, the other client there, the caregiver, may think that they have access to things that they may not have access to, or they may not know other benefits that are available for their veteran service members. So again, this is why, as you're meeting with your clients, these are some of the speed bumps that you may run into that can make it difficult to create a financial plan. And then as you are working with clients, you may see that the caregiver experiences what's known as caregiver fatigue. And this is often demonstrated by just a lack of emotional involvement, a lack of drive and motivation for solving additional problems because they're so focused on caring for their veteran family member that they just almost lose the mental capacity to care about anything else. And so this is a thing that can affect, as you're trying to develop a plan with your veteran family and their caregiver, that these could become challenges and speed bumps. And then lastly, the caregiver may not understand the VA medical system. I've seen this in cases where a new spouse may marry a veteran after their military service, and the spouse just has no idea how to access services and benefits via the VA system. And depending on how resistant or non-resistant that veteran is, they may or may not be willing to share a lot of information related to accessing care via the VA medical. And so these are some of the challenges from a caregiver perspective that you may see influence how that veteran client of yours is responding to your plan, financial information, advice, etc. One of the things that I find fascinating about veterans and military members overall is just this immense resiliency to overcome multiple challenges, to overcome adverse situations. But there is a thing that may or may not be known to many of you, which is known as moral injury. And moral injury comes from participation in activity related to combat warfare, such as killing and or harming others. And you may think, why are we talking moral injury in the midst of a financial conversation? And the reason I want to emphasize and bring this up is because a lot of times what may manifest itself as apathy or lack of care or no desire to plan for the future might be indicative of a military veteran who is experiencing moral injury. And that often comes from the question, why am I here and the other person is not? And this is helpful, not that you need to solve this or that you have to be an expert in moral injury, but just so that you can develop a sensitivity that as you're creating a financial plan with a client, if all of a sudden they just seem non-interested in planning for the future and they often seem really caught up in focusing on the past, they may be experiencing symptoms of moral injury, and this can hinder their commitment to the financial plan. This can hinder their commitment to setting and or keeping financial goals. And so this is something that's super unique to the veteran community that you may not see when working with civilians, because most often, even if you've never been in combat, I did not serve overseas in a combat zone, but several of my close friends did. And just as being a friend to them, I heard their stories. I experienced secondary trauma, if you will, because of the things that they shared with me. And so moral injury can manifest itself whether or not the veteran actually served in combat. And as we're thinking about some of the things that will affect how a veteran sees him or herself, one of the big things that is garnering a lot of attention and even more research lately is traumatic brain injury. And this is often called an invisible wound because it doesn't manifest itself outwardly, but rather it's an internal injury. And many of our men and women who served in the military during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, they experienced traumatic brain injury as the IEDs or individual explosive devices were going off. And just even if they were in a war zone area and any other type of explosive went off, you may experience traumatic brain injury and not even know it because there's no outward symptoms, there's no bleeding, there's no open wound. And so you could have this injury on the inside that affects your ability to think clearly, it affects your ability to process. It also can affect your higher order functioning, the prefrontal cortex, which is where all of the important decision making takes place. So you might find yourself working with a client and you're trying to have a conversation around simple mathematics, but if that client is unable to process that information, it may be the result of a traumatic brain injury. Most recently, I watched a news report of an organization here where I am locally that's doing work around traumatic brain injury. And one of their clients shared that his alcoholism, his lack of emotional connectedness to his family, and the fact that he was not suicidal, but just had no care for the future. All of these things were connected to his traumatic brain injury. And he literally had to learn how to reprogram his brain to function at a higher order. And as a result, it made me think for this presentation, there are some of you working with clients right now, and it appears that they're not connecting with the content. And it might be a result of an untreated traumatic brain injury, just the inability to focus and to function at a higher order. This one, I'm sure many of you are familiar with because I remember President George W. Bush made this his clarion call around raising awareness for post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD is often associated with the military community, although it affects all people who have experienced any sort of trauma. And so PTSD is about experiencing a traumatic event. And usually in the veteran community, this can come from something related to combat. It could come from extensive training or intensive training. And for women who are in the military, PTSD is often resulting from military sexual trauma. The tricky thing about PTSD and TBI is they are, again, the invisible wounds. These are not things that you can look and readily see that someone has experienced this wound. But PTSD often associates itself with just the inability to handle situations. I know folks who have the inability of sleeping through the night as a result of their PTSD. People who cannot be in environments with loud noises. Sometimes even the light from the computer screen could trigger things in their minds that make it difficult for them to concentrate and to focus. And so you might be working with the client, and as you're trying to convey information and get them to thinking about future plans and financial goals, and you're realizing that the client appears to not be totally focused, or the client appears to not be fully engaged. This might be as a result of PTSD that they're experiencing, and it may not even have anything to do with the session that you're in. It may have been something that triggered them just prior to them meeting with you. And so as you're thinking about how to work with your clients, just being aware that there are lots of other roadblocks that our veteran clients are experiencing even before they come to the session with you. And so having this information, my hope is that it will give you a little bit more sensitivity to some of the challenges that our clients are facing. Now, this one is not specifically for the veteran community, although I've been doing a little reading, and I'm seeing that some researchers are starting to investigate the connection between military veterans and the higher rates of ADHD. And so this one really is for individuals who have trouble paying attention, controlling impulsive behavior, or those who just might be overly active. And if you're like me and you're around a teenager these days, you probably feel like all teenagers have ADHD. But what the research is also showing is while ADHD is often diagnosed in younger people, they are now noticing that those who have come out of the high intense environment of military life, sometimes it's hard for them to wind it back down. Sometimes it's hard for those who have been in high pressure situations for an extended period of time to really learn how to calm down. And so as a result, there are numbers of military veterans and as adults who are now being diagnosed with ADHD at a much higher rate. This one probably will affect you more than the others that I discussed, because oftentimes if you're sitting with a client and they have trouble focusing, or you've given them an assignment and then they come back to you and they didn't do it, and we may think, okay, the client is not compliant, but really there could be something else going on, another invisible wound related to ADHD that's hindering that client from fully connecting with what's happening with the financial plan, the financial counseling, and or coaching session. So it's important that as you're working with your clients, if you notice signs and symptoms of, okay, there's something that seems to be a little bigger here that's causing us not to make progress going forward, this might be a conversation where you may want to say to them, is there anything medically that could possibly be hindering this? They may not even have made the connection themselves between some things that happened in their military experience and what's hindering them from connecting with the financial plan that you're creating with them today. So those are a couple of the things that we wanted to chat about from the standpoint of what's going on or could possibly be going on in the mind of the military veteran that you are working with. But this next slide is really going to touch on something that I find personally disheartening. And the stat on the screen, which I got from the USDA website, talks about 1 in 9 working age veterans live in food insecure households. And the interesting thing about that is when you're an active duty military member, food, shelter, and clothing are provided for you. And so I think about many of my active duty brothers and sisters who joined the military at a young age, 18, 19, 20, and they come into an environment that provides all of your basic needs and gives you a skill. And it's almost like a sterile environment where everything is provided for you. And then now you leave the military and you're cast into an environment where you essentially have to do these things on your own. Those of us who've had a civilian only experience, we think that this is normal to have the skill to take care of yourself. In fact, we often call it adulting. But I think about military members who joined the military at a young age and who didn't have this experience, but they grew up in an environment that provided so many things for them. Now they come out and they're in a community where they need to learn to provide and take care of themselves. And so when you find out that there are veterans who are living in food insecure households, it really just challenges me to do more as a financial professional to help them learn the skills to navigate day-to-day basic finances so that they are no longer finding themselves in this situation. A lot of it I'm going to talk about in a moment from a different perspective. A lot of it is related to what skills that veteran leaves the military with and how transferable are those skills to finding employment. But this here, again, I think of it as another invisible wound because if a veteran comes to a session with you and they're working on a plan with you for their future, but their present needs are not met, I would consider that a huge roadblock to successfully working with that client. If you have a client that seems overly concerned or distracted with taking care of today's needs, or if you look at the client's budget and you realize that their income is not matching their expenses, the first thing that might want to come to mind for you is food insecurity. And that really just speaks to households where they either don't have enough financial resources to provide food for themselves, or it also can speak to households that are in communities where food is not healthy and fresh food is not available for them. And so these are two obstacles to working with clients who might find themselves not able to concentrate on a future plan because their present needs are ever pressing. And then this in the graphic there in front, I show a food bank. Here in my local community, the food banks are just reporting the increasing need for donations because many Americans are coming to food banks. And so I recognize that this is not a veteran only challenge. However, I do have a sensitivity for those veterans who have come into the military at a young age, the military members, and then they didn't acquire the skills needed to really process what it looks like to have the financial chops, if you will, to manage all of the different expenses that come across. Because again, when you were active duty, food, shelter, and clothing, your basic necessities were taken care of for you. For me, food insecurity dovetails right into this next point, which speaks to inconsistent employment. When I left the military, I served in a transition program that helped other military veterans, women specifically, transition from active duty life into civilian life. And the greatest challenge that I saw across the board was inconsistent employment. A lot of that speaks to when the veteran has skills that are not easily transferable into the civilian sector, but also the environment is just inherently different. I talked at the beginning about how most of the times veterans are in a very tight-knit community. Military members, we know what our jobs are, we know how to do them. There's very little change. Everyone is on the same page. We have rank, hierarchy, structure. A lot of these things are built in to help equip military members for success. Once a military member leaves the military and they become a veteran, some of these safeguards, if you will, are no longer in place. Now you are responsible for finding your own job, making sure that you have the right skills for that job. And then also, if you go to a job and then you meet with the HR person, you have to now figure out what benefits to apply for. You didn't have to do that when you were active duty because they had the medical plan already prepared for you. And then you have to figure out how much do I want to save for retirement? How much do I want to put in an HSA account if it's available? You have to figure out how much do I want to have withheld for my taxes? All of these things that lean into skills and abilities for transferring your military training into a civilian job. And as a result, when you have some of those invisible wounds that I mentioned previously, not only do they affect your ability to process your own household finances, they can also affect your ability to stay at a job, to do well at a job, and to get promoted at a job, which could lend itself to a financial increase. And so some of the things that the actual veteran may face is lack of transferable skills, lack of savings. Because the military pays you consistently on the 1st and the 15th of the month, it can get real easy and real comfortable to rely on that some veterans may not have a savings habit when they leave the military. Thus, they don't have savings in their account. Another challenge that the veteran may experience is lack of understanding the different benefit programs. 401k, 403b, all of these things, we know them and we understand them, but sometimes the veteran may come out and not know that I can roll over my retirement plan from one employer to the next, and that could hinder what's available to them and how they create their financial plan as they're working with you. I mentioned about the caregiver, but let's think about the veteran's spouse. Many military members rotate or reassign or move 3 to 4 years at every time. And so as a spouse, you're packing up and moving with your veteran member, which creates a sporadic work history for you. It can also lend itself to incomplete training and or certifications as you're moving from state to state. And then finally, it gives you a limited social network. Many of us know it's very difficult to go into a new community and just simply go to Indeed or any job board and apply for a job. Rather, most of us have gotten our jobs because people in our network knew us, knew our skills, and knew about an opening. But if you're a military spouse and then now a veteran spouse, you didn't get a chance to build that network. And so you may have those things as a challenge to creating consistent employment for you. And then finally, as a household, this inconsistent employment creates lack of savings for the entire household. It also creates lack of retirement planning. You know, if you've been at a job for a while and you know that retirement options are available to you, you can then make a financial plan with those retirement options as part of it. But if you have inconsistent employment, you've not been anywhere long enough to really build up retirement savings, which ultimately affects retirement planning. And then the catalyst for all of this is increased debt. I've seen many military members and veterans who leave the military, and as they're navigating transition with inconsistent employment, they lean on credit cards to cover between point A and point B, and then that leads itself to increased debt. So all of these challenges, from the invisible wounds of moral injury, traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress, food insecurity, and inconsistent employment. These are all the things you will never see written on the veteran when they walk into your office or when they log into your Zoom call. These are the invisible things that truly will impact how they interact with you, but you have no indication that these things are going on other than paying close attention to your engagement with the veteran. So I wanted to share these with you all because I believe that oftentimes we talk about the do's and the don'ts of working with military members. We talk about all the benefits that they have, and we talk about the financial resources available to them. But what's often not discussed is what are some of these invisible wounds that will hinder or make it challenging for us as we are working with our military veterans. So this now takes us to what I think should be your exciting part, is thinking about, okay, now that I know these are some of the challenges, I'm even more committed to serving this community of people. So I want to talk to you about why your work matters, because everyone doesn't do this work. Everyone doesn't intentionally work with the CAN project or work with Pro Bono. And so I want to just share with you why I believe your work matters. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the fact that you can provide planning and advice to underserved families, which help people in need. The intrinsic value of helping someone in need is a great asset that you can provide to this community. Additionally, someone may just need a little bit of financial education to help them overcome a barrier. You now get to be the one to help them overcome that barrier. In my mind, I think about hurdlers running on a race and then crossing the finish line. You could be the one to help this client cross the finish line to financial success simply by being available and providing financial information for them. We recognize that pro bono work is hard. It's often, we would say, probably thankless, and you feel like you're doing so much, and what is the return on the investment? But your act of selfless service is something that your veterans can relate to. When you're working with the veteran community, these are the men and women who volunteered to defend our country. And so if you walk into the engagement thinking, I'm going to do this because I want to serve, and this individual on the other side of my call can relate because they too have come from a background of service, this is a great place for you two to build a bridge. And then lastly, many people have had lots of different experiences with financial professionals. And I know veterans, we can be distrusting of all things. And so someone may have had a negative experience with a financial professional in the past, and they finally have mustered up the courage to come and meet with you. And so you now have the amazing opportunity to change their view of what financial services the industry can look like, as well as establishing a relationship with someone who can be a trusted partner for them. So you all, while it may be difficult, while you may have these challenges, you all are really the catalyst for change and are positioned to make great things happen. But I want to share something that's a little quirky, something that I thought you might find interesting. Military members all have a core value system that we adhere to. These are the highest standards that our individual branches require of us, and we never forget them. Even as I think about the very words core values, my brain automatically starts saying the core values of the Air Force. And so I wanted to just take a moment and make a correlation for you between the core values of each of the branches and why your work matters. So I'm going to take one aspect of the core values of each branch. And if you're here on this chat or on this webinar and you're a military member, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you're probably hearing your own brain say the core values. So I want to just arm you with this, why your work matters, because it's actually directly related to the core values of our military men and women. So the first one is Army. The core value is personal courage. You could be the catalyst for helping someone overcome their financial barrier. They've had the courage to come to you or to your office, and you can now have the personal courage to lean into helping them overcome that barrier. The Marines and the Navy, they have commitment as part of their core values. So your commitment ensures that another family has an opportunity to experience greater financial freedom. We are counting on you and your commitment to help make a difference for these military veterans. The Air Force has the core value that says service before self. Pro bono work is hard, but it is definitely an act of selfless service. And so by you putting the service of others before yourself, you're leaning right into the core values of the Air Force. And then the Space Force, they have courage as one of their core values. It truly takes courage to admit that you don't know something, right? To admit that you need help. And so your service answers the call for our military members who are willing to have the next step, who are willing to courageously take the next step. And then the Coast Guard, they have the core value that includes respect. Your professionalism gives a respectful experience for our veterans as they come with you with these challenging situations, and you can help them really develop trust and resiliency working with a financial professional. So while it may seem that all you're doing is showing up and all you're doing is having a Zoom call and all you're doing is answering a few questions, you are making a difference. Your work matters, and it is directly related to the core values of our different military branches. So give yourselves a round of applause as you think about that. But now I want to arm you with some resources for your next client engagement, because I know if you're anything like me, you're like, this is great. I appreciate the pep talk. Thank you for telling me. But you mentioned some invisible wounds, and I need to know, how do I navigate that during my next client meeting? So what I want to do is draw your attention to a few resources that I personally have experience with. This list is by no means inclusive. In fact, it's probably just the tip of the iceberg of resources that are available. But again, this is my story. These are the resources that I know, so I thought it would be helpful to share them with you. The first thing is understanding VA benefits. On the VA website, there is a link where they talk about all the benefits that are available and understanding. And the key here is it will actually tell the service member in the paragraphs what the eligibility requirements are. That is the first step to working with a client who may or may not understand what their VA benefits are. The next resource is Military One Source. This is a group of professionals who cover all sorts of areas from financial education, mental health, navigating military life, resources for the veteran, resources for active duty, resources for the spouse. Great resource to get information all in one location. And then there are several veteran service organizations. We have the VFW, which is Veterans of Foreign Wars, DAV, which is Disabled American Veterans. We have American Legion. All of these are professional organizations that have resources in your local community that are specifically designated to serve the veterans there. Now, in addition to resources that serve veterans, I like organizations that empower and equip veterans. So the next bullet talks about IAVA, which stands for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. And they really work with veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, but they help you get connected to volunteer opportunities in your community. When I work with IAVA, I learned so much about veteran advocacy and how to really be a representative in the veteran community. The next organization is Mission Continues. Mission Continues is one of my favorites. They are all about getting in and doing work in the community alongside other community members. My family, we have done several service projects, from building raised bed gardens to painting classrooms in a school, through our connection and relationship with the Mission Continues. And then the next, I thought it was important to highlight two organizations that are intentional on serving women veterans. The first one is Women Veterans Alliance, a national organization that provides resources, retreats, and community for women veterans. And then the last one is Camouflage Sisters, which is actually an organization of women veteran authors who come together and tell their stories. And they have a network of support. They encourage women to navigate some of these invisible wounds through the art of storytelling. So a really fantastic organization. And then finally, Woven, which stands for Women Veteran Network, they come together and they do retreats and activities with the women throughout the country, but their emphasis is on small groups. So this is just a few of the organizations that are available to not only help you learn more about the veteran community, but also that you can share with the veterans that you're working with if they need resources to getting them connected. And just because I'm an academic, I didn't want to leave you without all the resources. So I've included links to the ones that I've mentioned, as well as a few others on the final slide, which will be available to you all after this presentation. So that concludes our time together. I saved a little bit of time for any questions and answers, but I want to thank you for your attention and your time. And I just hope that as you leave this webinar, you feel equipped, you feel excited, and you feel prepared to serve in your veteran community and your military veterans navigating their finances with Valor. All right, Rachel, I see you there. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let's jump into some conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandy. Thank you so much. I was reading one of the comments and I totally echo it. You're just so passionate, and just listening to you is so inspiring. So I just wanted to thank you so much for being here today and for speaking with us. I want to welcome everyone to post some questions in the online Q&A. There's a few questions about volunteering, and a few questions for folks who aren't CFP professionals and who want to volunteer. And so FFP's program with the Coordinated Assistance Network, unfortunately, is only for certified CFP professionals. Sometimes we encourage candidates or others to work in conjunction with the CFP professional to engage with some of these organizations that require CFPs. So we encourage you to find a colleague or a friend who's a CFP and work together. There are programs for financial coaches, AFCs as well. I'm just not familiar with all of them, actually. I think there's one right now with the Coordinated Assistance Network as well. Just looking through the questions now, I wanted to let folks know that the code for AFCs to report their continuing education credit to AFCPE is FFP10, and I'll write that into the chat as well, and we'll send it out by an email. So that's FFP10. Okay, now I'm going to go through some of these questions. what language do you have to delicately ask about those invisible wounds?
That's, actually, when we were preparing for this, I feel like Dick had a great response for that one. Just observing the client. And Dick, I'd love for you to hop in and share before I say anything.
Sure. One of the experiences that I've had, and I've worked with a number of veteran clients, is you start to sense something different about the way they react to your suggestions and how well they focus. And I found this not just with folks that had ADHD or PTS, but just generally a lot of the younger folks in particular just want to get on with the issue that they want to address now. We often are trained to create a plan with all of its magnificent parts. And in my experience, you'll almost never get a veteran that will work through that process in a short period of time. So my advice is, once you start to sense that, try to give that veteran client just one or two tasks, and then follow up on it fairly often, and you'll make some progress, and they'll start to see the process and appreciate it and start to connect in better. Their executive skills are weak and they just don't focus well. And so just one or two tasks that they can really stick to will make a huge difference.
Thanks so much, Dick. Are there resources we can reference regarding disability benefits that military personnel are receiving? The places I've been stumped most is with the benefits that are offered and making sure veterans take advantage of it.
So that's where your veteran service organizations will come into play, because they can help the veteran learn about resources that they may or may not know about. Additionally, because it is related to medical, there's not like a public repository of information where you can just go and say, oh, Brandy has this, and the other. But I would definitely recommend connecting with your veteran service organizations and having your veteran also connect with them to learn about the resources that are available, because there may be unique resources available that are in your community that are not everywhere. Like here in where I live, we have equine therapy specifically for veterans, and I did not know about that when I lived in another location. So definitely connecting with your veteran service organizations.
Are there any custodial relationships more beneficial for veterans, kind of like USAA?
I'm not sure I understand what custodial relationships are. That might just be my brain tapped out. Dick, do you know what that is a reference to?
No, I don't. I mean, someone mentioned USA. I know that there are some long-term care benefits. They're modest, but in some cases for disabled veterans, they're eligible for long-term care support. Usually it's contracted, but it is a benefit. So that's the kind of thing that probably you'll get your best and most specific answer by engaging a veteran service organization like the VFW or the American Legion or something like that. Because it's hard to navigate VA's website. It's so big and there's so much stuff on there. It's hard for a veteran to figure it out themselves. Heck, it's hard for me to figure out. I'm a web denizen. So sometimes those veteran service organizations are really, really helpful in helping and navigate that stuff and figure out what you could be asking for. Actually, the range of things you ask for is bigger than you might think.
Right. So Dana Crosby says custodial relationship as in a brokerage services. So I would recommend for this, you would want to reach out to your county veteran service officer. And the reason I would go there for like a brokerage style relationship versus a veteran service organization is because they have the one-to-one relationship with the veteran affairs, and they've been given the authority to act on behalf of your veteran. So you would want to reach out to your county veteran service office And also, if the veteran doesn't know, part of the claims process on the VA's website, when they go to say, I want to, take services or file a claim, the VA will then provide on their website a list of authorized vendors, for lack of a better phrase, but they will provide a list of authorized partners who can act as a power of attorney for that veteran.
Wonderful. Any last comments, Brandy or Dick? We really appreciate having you here. It's been wonderful. We're gonna report CE credit for CFP professionals for the CFP board. And then AFC's report directly to AFCP using the code that we provided that's currently in the chat. And any CFPs that are interested in volunteering for the Coordinated Assistance Network, please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions. And again, thank you so much.
Before we go, I just want to foot stomp what Laura Dean said and reiterate, do not let your veteran pay for anyone to file a claim for them. Do not let them pay for those services. Thank you, Laura, for calling that out.
Great advice. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.